Today, we're joined by Lisa Dickman, a dear friend and a dedicated KWPN breeder who has been producing exceptional horses since 2009. Each year, she thoughtfully breeds a small number of foals, primarily for dressage, but they've excelled in other disciplines as well. Her program has earned multiple inspection champions and repeated top 10 national rankings on the KWPN North America Curing Tour. And in a full circle moment, every breeder dreams of the very first foal she's bred is now competing at the Grand Prix level. Beyond breeding, Lisa manages Kaneques Farm, where she raises 15 to 20 young horses from birth through 3 years old. Her focus is on developing confident, healthy, and well-started athletes, setting them up for long-term success with their future partners. She has carefully built a program that prioritizes strong foundations, sound development, and thoughtful early handling. And we're excited to dive into her approach today. I want to invite you to join me in the Hale and Hardy Horse Collective, where every week we take a holistic look at health and soundness issues that affect the daily lives of the horses we love. So, Lisa, welcome.
Hello, welcome.
So, from your perspective, when you're thinking about breeding, when do you actually start to think about the foal's health?
The foal's health begins the moment that you decide to breed your mare. I think in order to set the stage for a successful pregnancy and birthing, you have to start with the health of your mare. A lot of times you have to make sure your mare is in good condition, not too fat and not too thin. Usually kind of like in the middle of this scale because that's really, really important because your mare has to carry this foal for 11 months. And so you've got to make sure that your mare is healthy prior to even considering breeding them. A lot of times we battle with food is love, and we feel like if we feed our horses the nicest, most beautiful green, rich hay, and our mare's nice and fat, that we're doing good things for them. But sometimes that doesn't set the stage for a healthy foal. The nutrition that that baby gets and that the mare is giving to the foals, it helps to first set the stage with having your mare start at a healthy weight. It helps them get pregnant easier, and it helps prevent problems later on. You don't want to have a mare that's obese that you breed and then end up with problems like laminitis later on, late term pregnancy. So that's kind of always been my thing. And then I would say the way it's set up with nature is the foal does the most growing the last trimester. So we have 3 trimesters. We have the first trimester, which is usually where they're just small. You find the heartbeat. They're just growing second trimester. And then the third trimester is when the baby does the bulk of the growing. And someone had said to me that because that's when in the wild, if they were running around in the wild, they would have a foal at their side, and so they would still be nursing that foal, and usually they would kind of wean that foal at about the second or the third trimester, and then that's when their pregnancy will then the foal inside of them will grow and develop the most.
Wow, so that's a lot of demand on the mare in the wild.
Yes. Exactly. And so that's kind of, I think it's nature's way, that they end up with the majority of the growth of that foal comes in that last trimester.
They devote their resources to that foal.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what probably be nursing less of the foal that they have at their side. So yeah, it's kind of nature's way of doing and making it successful for the horses to continue on.
So I know most of your horses, like your mares, you bought young, you've been raising them for a while, so you can really make sure that everything is good to go. You can manage them, manage their nutrition and all of that. Have you ever had a mare that maybe came into you and you had to make sure that you got everything together, got her nutrition, got her weight in the right place, got everything so that you felt that she was ready to breed or ready to foal? Has that been a challenge if you've had any mares like that?
I think the biggest challenge is an overweight mare. Obesity in horses is incredibly hard to manage. So that's a big challenge. But, if they're underweight, you can kind of throw calories at them. I kind of have a rule of thumb with all my horses. They call them NSCs or non-structural carbohydrates. So I try to really not give them, and that's basically starches or sugars So I try to, even on an underweight mare, I try to give them calories, but I try to make them useful calories. So
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely, if I had my preference, I would prefer to have a mare a little on the underweight side than overweight, just simply because it's a little harder to manage. It's hard to get to muzzle them and everything like that. That's just a
Yeah.
hard management.
I tell my clients all the time that, like, for me, the easy keepers are the hardest.
Yeah.
And when you look at it from a metabolic perspective, you have to make sure that they're getting everything they need. You can't starve them, but yet you have to really manage them and have a very conscious intention of making sure they're getting all of the nutritional elements, but yet not too many calories. And I think that is extremely hard. So I would imagine when you're trying to get a healthy foal, that makes it even harder.
Yes, exactly. A healthy mare helps set the stage for a healthy foal. And you
Yeah.
figure if they're processing a lot of sugars that aren't helpful to them, it's probably also going through to the foal. It's very important, and especially in that last trimester. And there's a lot of ins and outs with mares being pregnant. You also have to manage the fescue and the toxins in your environment. And that's kind of something you have to have a conversation with your vet about. I'm a big proponent of ration balancers simply
Mhm.
because there isn't a lot of non-structural carbs in there, and it's kind of like protein and vitamins and minerals. And so for
Yeah.
me, that last trimester, I will kind of really up the mare's amount of ration balancer because I figure that's when the baby's growing the most. And so that's when they're going to also need added protein and vitamins and minerals. So I'll usually that last trimester and through nursing offer more ration balancer for the mares.
To understand nutritional requirements, good feeding practices, and ration balancers, check out the Hale and Hardy Horse Journal at halehardyhorses.com. You made a comment the other day about how much hay you go through with your horses too, because I know that you're really conscious about them having their forage.
Right. And that's the basis of the ration balancer is you want to
Yeah.
have forage based diet. And so it's the vitamins and minerals and protein, and then the bulk of their diet comes then from hay. So that's the other thing you can talk to your vet or an equine nutritionist to find out and make sure, given your area, what's the best setup for you. But, for me, I really try to stick to that low starch carbs out of their diet because again,
Yeah.
everybody loves potato chips, but it doesn't mean we need to have a diet of potato chips. I
Yeah.
really make sure I watch that. I think that's pretty important for a pregnant mare and for her gestation.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've talked about before the nutrients, like the vitamins and minerals, because selenium in our area is very deficient, but not in other areas. So you have to, like you said, really make sure it's for your particular area that you're balancing what the horse needs.
Exactly. And vitamin E. That's another thing they're finding is really, really important for gestation and for young foals is to make sure they get vitamin E through grass. But that's another thing. They have tests for that where you can make sure that they are getting an adequate amount of vitamin E because they're finding more and more that that is also really, really important to the growing foal. So,
Yeah. It's interesting too, because we always think of, like, in people, the fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K, that we don't want to take too much of it because it can become toxic. But in horses, actually, you can supplement with very large doses of vitamin E if needed. There's like a range of what would be considered mandatory, but then with horses that have EPM or some of these other neurologic problems, the vets now are able to help them with these high doses of vitamin E. So sometimes if you're concerned about that, like especially in the wintertime when they can't get fresh grass, that you can supplement fairly safely with a dose of vitamin E without worrying as much as you would in the human world about toxicity.
that's
So
interesting.
I know a lot of people have gone to that because of this new research on the vitamin E playing a part in some of these developmental problems.
Well, and a lot of some places don't have grass, depending on what part of the
Yeah.
country. California, I know in Europe, they're kind of a lot of them are raised over the winter inside. So they
Mhm.
don't have access to grass to the extent that someone maybe in Kentucky can. So it is important to monitor that as well. I mean, it's not just let me get my mare pregnant, I want to have a baby. I mean, there's a lot that you have to do from a management perspective too to make sure you're setting them all up for success.
If you'd like to know more about vitamin E, your horse's requirements, supplementation, and bioavailable forms, check out podcast episode number 16. Yeah, and that's why I had you on, because I don't know as much about the breeding part of it. It's not my jam. I buy your beautiful babies, but I don't breed them and foal them out. Yeah. So what maybe have you learned the hard way about something that either happened in the later gestation period or in the early foal development period that you would be a gem to pass on to people?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's like the school of hard knocks. If I could pass on anything to anybody so they don't have to go through that, I would love to. I think one thing, I go back to the whole nutrition aspect. There are issues that can come if your nutrition needs aren't meant for the foal. Simple things like, as much as I say you have to manage the mare, then when the foal is on the ground, you also have to manage the foal's intake. And the biggest thing you see on all these TikTok videos that are so cute of the baby pushing the mama off her food, eating the big bag of sweet feed that the mama's eating. That to me, I think was my biggest discovery. As cute as that is, those babies are eating a lot more than you realize. And especially if you're trying to maintain the mare's weight and you do have higher calorie food for them, it's not good for the baby. And so I had to learn the hard way that you have to really try to manage and keep those babies from overindulging on the calories that their moms are taking in, because the negative effect for that is growth. And if they start
too quickly,
yes, they get too many calories, too much sugars, they're going to grow. And then you're kind of speeding up the growth process. And that will lead to issues related to growth. I don't know if we want to go down into the whole OCD thing. It's hard because, again, it's very cute. We think, oh, that's sweet. They're eating mama's grain. And sometimes it's a management thing. I used to have to lock the babies out of the stall. In fact, the way my stalls are set up, I can put the mom's food high enough, but we get to the point where the baby's big enough to reach into it and the babies have to go during feeding time outside because we just don't want them to eating the food. So if I could teach anybody that, I would say really monitor the calorie intake of non-structural sugars they don't need. And the mom might need it because she needs to produce milk. She needs to have enough calories, but the baby doesn't. The baby gets enough from mom.
Yeah. Is that when you just started with the feed bags, or no, that's a different scenario?
That's different. So what I do when they're in the barn and you have control over how you're feeding them, then I just do hay buckets and I just raise them higher and higher. But feed bags, I use them in my farm when I'm feeding the youngsters because every horse eats something different. You have the ones that are every calorie you give them that goes just straight to growing and they look like skinny little bean poles the whole time. And you're like, I swear I'm feeding this horse. It's not starving. And then you have the other ones that they just look at food and they just get fat. So I have incorporated using, they call them face bags. I call them feed bags. Some people call them face feeders. You can also do that with a mare and foal. You can put one on, but it's like a bag where you put the individual amount of food that the horse has, and then you put it over their ears like a halter, and then they eat out of it. And that has worked really, really well for me for feed management at the farm. And it cuts down aggression.
Yeah, because they can't fight over, because they can't reach it. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like they don't really know what's there. If you put a bucket on the ground, then all the youngsters fight for it. But if everybody has a feed bag on, then everybody just sits in their world and eats their food and they don't even really realize the other one has food. It's kind of an amazing thing.
So you make sure that every horse is getting what they're supposed to be getting, and the more timid one isn't always getting chased off its own food.
Yeah, if you feed them in a group without that kind of setup, that absolutely is what happens. And they tend to get a little kicky. They tend to push each other off. And so it really adds a lot of stress. And a lot of times we talk about the problem that you have with horses having ulcers. Little things like that, feeding and stresses at feed time, can contribute to that. So whatever I can do to minimize that.
So is there an aspect of the mare's like behavior or physical presentation that you see passes on or imprints on the foal the most?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's nature and there's nurture. So there are some things that you see from a mare, because at this point I have a mare that has had multiple offsprings and I have two of her daughters with me. And as different as they are, you can still tell that they are the mother. They have similar mannerisms. I don't know if I can put my finger on exactly what they are, but then you add nature in. So if you have a really aggressive mare, let's say a mare that is bossy or aggressive, then I would say you have to then add nurture into there a little bit more, and you have to imprint as much as you can on the foal good behavior. I am a big one on handling the foals. I teach them to lead from the start. But if you have a mother that does certain things, and those offspring will mimic or learn or maybe inherit some of those tendencies, or if maybe the mare developed her habits because she had a rough handling or something, that's for you to kind of, as a breeder, to be responsible. I think the big thing is, as breeders, we have to be responsible and hope that we're passing on a horse that we would be okay having again ourselves. If I end up with my mares over again, like if I get a little carbon copy of my mares, I'm absolutely 100% okay with it. But if you sit there and you're like, oh my God, I hate this mare, then why would you breed it?
Yeah. To the nature nurture thing a little bit extended, how do you balance when you see a foal that may not be doing as well in the moment as you think? How do you know how much to intervene or let things work through on their own? I know that might be a tough question because sometimes they go through stages and they might not look as good, but how do you know after all these years, like when you might need to do something or when you just sit on it for a little bit and wait and see how it goes?
Gosh, that's on so many facets. It's a hard question to answer. Talk about health. Let's talk about weight. Again, we talk about healthy rearing of a foal, and it starts with the mare's body condition. But as a foal, you also have to follow that along as well. And it's hard because they grow a lot. But you want the ideal, as your foal is growing and through weaning, the ideal weight or the ideal thing you're looking for is you want to be able to feel the ribs. You want to be able to put your hand over and feel where the ribs are. If you start getting a very fat baby, there are risks involved. But it's your job, if you're going to breed a youngster or raise a youngster, that you kind of manage their body score and make sure that they're not overweight. Or sometimes if they're really thin, then you also have to check for parasites and things like that. It's hard because there's so many parts to raising them and making sure everything's going well. But the biggest one is you really want to make sure you manage their nutrition. Worming is a big one because parasites can also have a really negative effect. Most young horses, they don't develop a natural immunity to parasites or worms until they're about 18 months old. So the worming process is a little bit more involved. It's a little bit more old school because they can get high worm loads quickly. So what I usually do is before weaning, I will give them a power pack, a Panacure power pack. And again, I go and resort back to the vet. You have to have a relationship with your vet to make sure you're managing it. But you're going to have to manage the worming a little bit more than you would maybe an adult horse. And then handling. I mean, I'm a big believer on handling them. There's that fine line between handling and overhandling. We handle them, they learn how to halter, they learn how to lead. And of course, it's a preferential thing with everybody. But for me, it works really well to get them to do those basic things by the time they're weaned so that they kind of understand people, they like being groomed, but they're not running and playing with you. So everything you do when you have a youngster, it's a big responsibility because you have the responsibility of, can I help them grow in the world healthfully? But can I also raise a youngster that will set them up for success mentally? You just have to have the responsibility and the mindset that I am raising this thing, this animal that will be a partner for somebody one day, and I want them to be successful. I guess that's really what it boils down to. You want them to be good, solid members of the horse society for future.
What's so great about your farm is because you have the stalls, you have all that if you're needed, but you also have these really large pastures that they can go out and be horses and play and learn all that kind of stuff. Last I visited, you had, here's the older horses pasture, and then here's like the 1 and 2 year olds pasture. So they all are getting to know each other and having that herd dynamic, but not being put in a position where, say, a 1 year old could get hurt by a 10-year-old.
Right. And that absolutely can happen. And it's weird too, because one time I had a gelding and I introduced a weanling to him and they loved each other. And then the next year I introduced a weanling to him and he tried to like jump all over, like literally jump on him. And the baby leapt out of the field because he was so terrified. They need to learn manners in a herd environment. I absolutely agree with that. But they also need a chance to still be babies, because yearling years and 2-year-olds, they're big and they look like adult horses, but they're still babies and they're still developing. I mean, raising youngsters is different. It is the same as raising adult horses, but it's also different. And another thing I like about the field environment and them growing up outside is that they can also learn to maneuver in difficult footing. I think for a lot of times our adult horses, we tend to try to keep the footing perfect because we don't want our sport horses to be injured or anything like that. But as babies, when they can be like, oh, it's muddy and this is very slippery, I better not do that stupid move that I've practiced so much in the field, then they get smarter and you can see them processing.
Yeah, get a little self-preserving in the bad footing and figure out, hey, maybe I shouldn't do that. In the neuroplasticity side of everything, and it's not that you take a horse that's been in a stall and then throw it into bad footing. That's not how that works. But the more that they learn to self-organize when things aren't perfect, the better athletes they are when things are perfect. I think we do a big disjustice to our horses when they are only in super good footing and only out when it's perfect, and then they're stuck in a stall. Because from the neuroplasticity side, they stay sounder and they have a much better ability to be able to handle variations that inevitably are going to happen in life, no matter how much you try and protect them, if they actually get to do those things. And so it sounds like right from the get-go, as youngsters, they're developing that neuroplasticity. And the only time that they would lose that is if they then were stuck in a stall. But that's really important for their brain development and for their nerve development to have that sort of environment.
And same with development of the hoof. I can go on and on about the things you have to watch out. Maintaining a good relationship with your farrier for the youngster. Mm-hmm. You can work with your farrier to help try to make sure their feet grow in an even level. And then I also make sure I monitor their hoof development, make sure we keep them on a good trim schedule. The studies have shown that as a foal grows, their joints close from the ground up. If you make sure you manage their feet and make sure that they are trimmed level, then as their joints close up, you're helping.
There's no undue stress on the joints all the way up if you're maintaining the base really well.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's what you're trying to say. Yeah.
Yes. I was just going to say, I had one that was born and she kind of tended to buckle a little bit, like inward with her foot. And we just trimmed her every 2 weeks and we made sure that it wasn't growing unevenly. And as she closed up with that joint, we set her up to be level, versus if I had ignored it and she continued to travel that way. And of course, I say, have a good relationship with your vet and farrier and make sure you talk to them about this as the foal's growing and don't ignore it. Anything that's related to a youngster, a lot of times I just say, you got to be patient. You've got to make sure you're doing the best as far as monitoring, and you got to give it time. So, I mean, there have been some really, really weird looking yearlings that grew up to be phenomenal looking 5-6-year-olds.
So is there something that you see regularly done in foal care that you just completely disagree with?
Probably overhandling. I think that would be my biggest thing, is treating them like a puppy. I mean, don't get me wrong. We love on them and we scratch them and we do all that stuff, but they still have to be horses. So I think that would probably, to me, be the biggest thing.
And is there something that you do less than other people? And can you share why?
I have learned that sometimes with things with young horses, you just have to let time do its trick. So I think overmanagement can sometimes be problematic. That's a fine line. I don't want to say make your own decisions without the advice of a vet, but there's nothing but time when it comes to youngsters. And I have seen I had one foal that got kicked in the patella. That's the bone right in front of the stifle. And it was shattered. It was a week old. It was shattered in pieces. And all we could do, it was rare because that kind of injury on a normal horse would be the end of its life, right? A horse can't survive the fractured patella. But this, because he was small and could walk around on three legs and hold his other leg up and didn't have the same problems that an adult horse had, he was able to be stalled and let it heal. And in the end, time did what it was supposed to, but it's hard because with adult horses, we're so hands-on and it's hard because we want an immediate fix. But with the babies, because they're growing, because they're changing, you have time on your side when it comes to youngsters because they are changing and developing so much. So that's the one thing I think anybody can take away from young horses is be patient.
Yeah, in some ways they're fragile, but in some ways they're more resilient at that age. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, last question. If you could change one thing about how the horse world thinks about a foal's life, what would it be?
What people don't understand is that a foal is a blank slate. They don't know anything. And so it's our responsibility to train them and to show them the world so that we set them up for success. The behaviors that you're instilling when they're younger is something that's going to definitely have an effect later on. So just kind of be responsible stewards to thinking about how you're going to want that foal to be like as an adult horse. So that would be the biggest thing.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, I think if you're thinking about raising foals, there is a lot to learn. There's people that excel at taking 5-year-olds to 8, and there's people that excel at taking FEI horses to Grand Prix, and there's people that excel at starting young horses and getting them to 5. And then there's people that excel at 2 to 5 years of age, but then there's a whole different skill set for each one of those times. And one of those times is literally born to 6 months or born to year or 2 years. And so if you don't know that much about it, I know you had a mentor, right? And I think that's so important because there's so much to know about each of those life stages. And I thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Definitely. And if you have a breed organization, a lot of times they will also have support groups or people, a Facebook group where you can go and ask questions, but definitely never feel like you are alone and never be afraid to ask because most of us learn by asking. And so the biggest thing is if you are considering breeding or you have a youngster and you have questions, don't be afraid to ask people because that's what everybody wants. They don't mind helping. We all want the same thing. We want to have our horses grow up happy and healthy.
Would you like to share your information so people know how to find you and how to find your foals? Because you have quite a few every year and they're always gorgeous. And you always take such beautiful videos and pictures of them. So would you like to share that with everybody?
Sure. I'm mostly on Facebook under Lisa Dickman, or you can find me on my website, kanequesfarm.com. And that's KANEQUESFARM.com.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lisa.
You're welcome.